NBIA, Natural Bioscience Intelligence Agency. The science is real. The mission is yours.
Dock 7, Le Havre. Inbound shipment from the Shandong province production run. Listed on the customs manifest as food grade optical brightener, micron grade. It is not micron grade. The particle size certificates are in the secondary documentation. They were not attached to the primary declaration. That distinction is worth approximately 2 regulatory categories and 0 scrutiny at customs.
Viper, confirm the particle size on the primary shipment.
Below 100 nanometers. Across the entire pallet run. This isn't whitener for paint steel. This is going into food.
What food?
Coffee creamer. 11 labels, 1 formulation, 3 to 6 exposures per consumer per day, every day, for as long as the product is on shelf. Which is indefinitely, because no one in the US regulatory system has restricted it. France banned this particle size 4 years ago. The product is still sitting at eye level in 3,400 American grocery locations as of this morning.
And it's not alone in the category. Same nanoparticle grade appears in white-coated confectionery, salad dressings, chewing gum, coffee creamers from 4 other manufacturers, and commercial frosting sold to institutional kitchens. Different products, same particle size, same intestinal destination. Biochemistry is indifferent to brand loyalty, Viper. It does not care which label is facing outward on the shelf.
Then we're not just looking at one product.
We never are. The countermeasure exists. It has been studied. It is specific to this pathway and accessible to any person who knows where to look. You will have it before this episode ends. 18 hours earlier, Geneva.
ANSES, Maisons Alfort, 40 kilometers east of Paris. The institution whose 2019 risk assessment produced France's 2020 ban on E171 titanium dioxide as a food additive. The published summary is what most researchers have read. The subgroup data behind it is what I am reading now. 11 Ghost. The unpublished subgroup data, not suppressed, simply never translated into English. The accumulation curves for intestinal Peyer's patches at 6 weeks of daily TiO2 nanoparticle exposure show tissue concentrations that would not register on any standard clinical panel. At 12 weeks, the same tissue shows measurable structural changes in the lymphoid architecture. This data informed the ban. It was never disseminated to the US regulatory discussion. The gap is not conspiratorial, it is bureaucratic, which at population scale produces the same outcome. Joining the mobile briefing now. The longitudinal picture is worse than the published summary. You need to hear the 12-week numbers.
The formulator does not manufacture this product. He owns the co-packing facility in New Jersey that manufactures it for 11 different retail brands simultaneously. The formulation is identical across all 11. The labels are different. That is the operation. Ghost the archive data.
The ANSES longitudinal animal studies tracked intestinal Peyer's patch tissue accumulation over 12 weeks of daily TiO2 nanoparticle exposure at concentrations consistent with 2 to 3 creamer servings per day. At 6 weeks, measurable nanoparticle concentration in mucosal lymphoid tissue. At 12 weeks, architectural changes in the lymphoid tissue structure and statistically significant elevation of inflammatory marker precursors. The exposure window for the primary consumer demographic adults 45 to 65 daily creamer users reaches the 6-week accumulation threshold within a standard purchase cycle. 1 box of creamer.
Frost. Mechanism.
Before the molecular detail and analogy, think of your intestinal lining as a border checkpoint. When everything is functioning, the checkpoint waves through nutrients and blocks foreign material. Now imagine a compound small enough to slip through the checkpoint undetected, not through the gate, through the wall itself. It gets to the other side, into the immune tissue, and it sets off the alarm system. The alarm isn't loud, it's low, persistent, and it never fully shuts off. That alarm is what we're tracking. Here is the mechanism. Titanium dioxide nanoparticles sub 100 nanometer particle size are taken up by Peyer's patches, the gut-associated lymphoid tissue embedded in the intestinal wall. At that scale, they trigger activation of the NLRP3 inflammasome, a protein complex inside macrophage immune cells that functions as a danger sensor. NLRP3 activation assembles a scaffold of 3 proteins, NLRP3 itself, ASC, and caspase-1. Once assembled, caspase-1 cleaves pro-IL, 1-beta into its active form interleukin, 1-beta, a primary driver of systemic inflammation. This is not an acute response. It is chronic, low-level, and below the detection threshold of standard inflammatory markers. It does not show on a routine blood panel, it accumulates.
If it doesn't show on a blood panel, how do we know it's happening?
Tissue biopsy of intestinal mucosa, which is not a standard clinical procedure. The ANSES data used animal intestinal tissue analysis at controlled exposure time points. The accumulation is real and reproducible. It simply requires looking in a place that routine medicine does not look.
The long-term consequence of chronic low-level NLRP3 activation in intestinal immune tissue is mucosal barrier degradation. Tight junction proteins, specifically occludin and ZO1, the molecular seals between intestinal epithelial cells, begin losing structural integrity under sustained IL, 1-beta signaling. The barrier becomes permeable, not catastrophically, incrementally. Over months and years, the consequence is a systemic pro-inflammatory state whose origin is invisible because it began in a tissue compartment that no one examined.
Population exposure. Numbers.
E171, the EU designation for food-grade titanium dioxide, is present in over 900 food products. In the US, FDA restriction does not exist. The private label Crema line identified in this operation reaches approximately 3.4 million consumer households through 3,400 grocery locations across 29 states. At 2 to 3 cups of coffee daily with Crema, 3 to 6 TiO2 nanoparticle exposures per day, 7 days per week, every week the product is purchased. That is the exposure profile of a pharmaceutical intervention delivered through a food product that carries no advisory.
And the co-packing facility ships to 11 brands. This is not one product. It is one formulation wearing 11 faces.
Countermeasure. Frost.
Quercetin, a flavonoid found at highest dietary concentration in capers, red onions, and lovage. Its mechanism is not chelation. It does not remove TiO2 particles from tissue. It intercepts the inflammatory cascade the particles initiate. Specifically, quercetin is a direct NLRP3 inflammasome inhibitor. It blocks assembly of the NLRP3, ASC, caspase-1 complex at the scaffolding stage. Without the scaffold, the inflammasome does not form. Without the inflammasome, caspase-1 is not activated. Without activated caspase, 1 pro-IL, 1 beta is not cleaved. The alarm is silenced at its molecular switch. Simultaneously, quercetin acts as a transcription modulator in intestinal epithelial cell nuclei, upregulating expression of ZO1 and occludin, the exact tight junction proteins that chronic NLRP3 activation degrades. The barrier does not simply stop deteriorating. It begins actively reinforcing itself. A 2019 study in food and chemical toxicology demonstrated full suppression of TiO2, nanoparticle-induced NLRP3 activation in intestinal epithelial cell lines at quercetin concentrations achievable through dietary intake.
Source location.
Pantelleria. I'm already booked. 14 hours later. Pantelleria Island, Sicily. Pantelleria. The world's highest confirmed dietary quercetin concentration per gram, up to 1,800 milligrams per 100 grams of dry salt-cured capers, Capparis spinosa. Same species available in every supermarket. Completely different quercetin profile depending on how it was processed. Frost. Confirm the processing differential.
Industrial brine processing destroys approximately 70% of the quercetin flavonoid matrix. Salt curing, specifically the traditional Pantelleria dry cure method used by the cooperative families here, preserves the full flavonoid structure. The difference in quercetin content between a traditionally dry salt cured Pantelleria caper and a standard commercial brine cured caper is a factor of 12. The jar most people have in their refrigerator door is not the same compound. It is the same vegetable processed into a different nutritional object.
And red onions.
Red onions contain 300 to 400 milligrams quercetin per 100 grams, concentrated in the outermost 2 to 3 layers. Raw is optimal heat degrades the flavonoid matrix. Lovage, less commonly consumed, carries comparable density to capers at peak season. For most people, red onions are the most practical high quercetin dietary source. Capers, specifically dry salt cured, are the most concentrated.
Steel. Source confirmed. Countermeasure confirmed. Initiating molecular verification.
Confirmed. Frost run the journey.
Quercetin. Ingested with a fat-containing meal olive oil in this geography, the correct choice for absorption. The fat triggers bile release, which creates the micellar environment quercetin requires for uptake. In the small intestine, absorption occurs through two parallel routes: passive diffusion across the enterocyte membrane and active transport via sodium-dependent glucose transporters. Peak plasma concentration, 2 to 3 hours post-ingestion. The molecule moves through the portal circulation to systemic distribution. At 2 hours, it reaches the intestinal lamina propria, the connective tissue layer directly beneath the epithelium. This is where the Peyer's patches sit. This is where the TiO2 particles have accumulated. This is the target zone. Inside the macrophage cytoplasm, quercetin binds to the NLRP3 scaffolding protein directly, not downstream, not through a secondary mediator. At the scaffold, the NLRP3 ASC interaction that initiates inflammasome assembly is blocked. The complex cannot form. Caspase, 1 remains inactive. Pro-IL-1 beta is not cleaved. The inflammatory signal the TiO2 particles have been broadcasting into the immune tissue chronically, silently, for however many weeks this exposure has been accumulating goes dark. Simultaneously, and this is the part that does not get discussed, quercetin translocates into the intestinal epithelial cell nucleus as a transcription factor modulator. It upregulates expression of ZO1 and occludin, the tight junction proteins whose structural integrity chronic NLRP3 activation had begun to compromise. The mucosal barrier does not simply stop degrading. Within 24 hours of quercetin reaching therapeutic concentration in the lamina propria, the epithelial cells begin producing more of the proteins that hold the barrier together. The TiO2 particles are still present in the tissue. They will remain there. They cannot be chelated. They cannot be cleared by this mechanism. But the alarm they were triggering, the silent, chronic, subclinical alarm driving systemic inflammation, has been intercepted at its molecular origin.
The compound is still there, but it's no longer running the operation.
That is the mission, not erasure. Neutralization.
If quercetin doesn't remove the particles, does someone have to take it indefinitely as long as the exposure continues?
Yes. The exposure is ongoing as long as the product is in the diet. Quercetin does not reverse the accumulation, it manages the downstream consequence. The correct intervention is both: reduce the exposure source and support the inflammasome pathway. One without the other is incomplete. Read the label of what you add to your coffee. If titanium dioxide or E171 appears anywhere on that ingredient list, you have identified the source.
Transmission complete. Regulatory packet sent. The 11 brands are still moving product.
The regulatory timeline is not ours to command. Our timeline is the data. The data is done.
The 12-week accumulation data is now in the regulatory packet as well. The untranslated subgroup tables. It is translated now.
Returning to base.
Estrogen receptor binding confirmed at 0.3 parts per billion. The compound accumulates in adipose tissue detection window at standard blood panels as 0. Scaling distribution through the personal care category. The exposure is daily, dermal, and entirely unregulated.
New signal, new category, new compound. He is already 3 moves ahead.
I have the frequency, working the source architecture now.
Then we work. E171 operation closed. Regulatory packet transmitted. Quercetin countermeasure documented. The next signal is dermal, endocrine, and undetected. Ghost, what do we know about adipose accumulating estrogen mimicking compounds in the personal care supply chain?
More than we should. less than we need. The longitudinal exposure data on dermal absorption of endocrine-disrupting compounds in personal care products is in the same category as the TiO2 archive it exists. It is damning, and it has not been translated into the regulatory language that would require action.
Then we translate it. Viper new field assignment, personal care category, dermal exposure route. The formulator is scaling distribution. We identify the compound before it reaches systemic concentration in the target demographic.
Understood.
Frost is already on the frequency. Operation 9 is authorized.
Everything you're about to hear has been published in peer-reviewed research. I'm going to give you the mechanism, the study, and the exact dose in plain language. The mechanism. Quercetin is a dietary flavonoid that directly inhibits NLRP3 inflammasome assembly in macrophage immune cells. It blocks the protein scaffolding interaction between NLRP3 and ASC, preventing the formation of the complex that activates caspase-1 and drives IL-1 beta, mediated systemic inflammation. It also upregulates tight junction protein expression, specifically ZO1 and occludin in intestinal epithelial cells, reinforcing the mucosal barrier that chronic NLRP3 activation degrades. Both mechanisms operate concurrently. Both are relevant to anyone with ongoing exposure to NLRP3, activating compounds in the food supply. The study, Boots, A.W. and colleagues, published in the European Journal of Pharmacology, 2008. A comprehensive review of quercetin's bioavailability and anti-inflammatory mechanisms, confirming NLRP3 inflammasome inhibition, NF-kappa B pathway suppression, which is the downstream signaling cascade that IL-1 beta drives, and tight junction protein stabilization. This review established the mechanistic framework that subsequent cell line studies, including the 2019 Food and Chemical Toxicology paper on TiO2 nanoparticle induced NLRP3 activation, have built upon. The dose, therapeutic range, 500 to 1,000 milligrams of quercetin daily, taken with a fat-containing meal. Fat is not optional, it is mechanistically required for the micellar absorption environment that allows quercetin to cross the intestinal epithelium at therapeutic concentration. Here is the detail the industry does not prominently display. Quercetin's intestinal bioavailability in isolation is approximately 17%. The supplement aisle is full of standalone quercetin capsules. Most do not include bromelain or vitamin C, the two cofactors that enhance quercetin bioavailability by 20 to 30%. Check the label of any quercetin supplement you currently take. If neither bromelain nor vitamin C appears on it, absorption is compromised before the capsule leaves your stomach. The food sources remain the cleanest option. Dry salt-cured capers, not brine-cured. The label will specify raw red onion and lovage. The dose in food requires consistent daily intake. The therapeutic range in supplementation requires the cofactor. Both are available, neither requires a prescription. NBIA, Truth and Transparency in Human Health.